Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode 27 of the Future of Work show. Now, for the last 7 months, we've been having conversations with leading academics and practitioners from all over the world to discuss the implications of future changes in technology, business ideas, practices for all of us. In today's series, we're going to look at what the recent change means for managing culture virtually. And I know that this is a topic that's top of the mind for many, many of you. Just before we planned out this conversation, my colleagues, Papia Banerjee and Jasprit Bindra and I had completed a dipstick study with over 40 organizations to understand their plans. As the lockdown starts to open up, what will the future look like for them? And I know that many of us are thinking about, some form of hybrid workplace, what that means for managing culture, what does that mean for managing productivity, et cetera, et cetera. So today's conversation is going to look at some of these topics. We're going to look at what does it mean to manage culture virtually. And what we're going to do is dip into the experiences of Ms. Smriti Handa, who is my guest for today. She's the Regional Director HR of Reckitt Benckiser. And we're going to ask her questions around what has worked for Reckitt Benckiser over this last year, and what is it that she can tell us about those experiences that can help us think about what the workplace of the future is going to look like. And for those of you who are wondering whether there's any help available in managing some of these transitions, please reach out to us. Uncube is committed to working with organizations and leaders around the future of work. And one of the areas we're focused on over the next 6-8 months is helping organizations make the transition to hybrid. So we're looking at what are some of the ideas that will help organizations and leaders maximize productivity performance, and what are some of those ideas that will help them really enhance the employee experience and engagement. So with that, let me bring on our special guest for today. Hi, Smriti.
Hi, Shalini. How are you?
Good. Listen, I'm so thankful to have you on the show today. As I said, the topic that we're going to be speaking about, what does it take to manage culture virtually, is one that's top of the mind for so many people. We know that organizations all over the world have now just begun thinking about what the future is going to look like. And, I think one of the things that's clear for all of us is that the future organization is not going to look anything like the organizations we left behind in 2019. So thank you so much for joining us for this conversation today.
Pleasure is all mine, Shalini. I think as we discuss such an important topic, I'm sure it's not just the two of us who learn from each other. I'm sure audience questions will also force us to think of what we are leaving behind, etc. So I'm really looking forward to this session.
Oh, thank you. And by the way, if you're watching us live, we do take questions and comments, and we're going to tap into Smriti's own experience to help answer some of those. So let me start by asking you this, Smriti. I know that you had mentioned perhaps several months ago that a keen area of interest for you was culture more broadly, not just managing culture virtually, but culture more broadly. So let me just start by understanding what got you interested in culture as a topic.
I think, Shalini, I have worked for three organizations by now. So one is Airtel, Philips, and Reckitt. I think when you move across organizations, you realize culture is not something that's very static, or you realize that it's very different across organizations. It's different depending upon what phase the organization is going through, what are certain leadership beliefs and behaviors. And when you see such changes, I think you automatically get interested. That was how I got interested. When you move from one Indian organization to European, you move from a telecom to an FMCG, you move from B2C to B2B, you realize so many factors change. And of course, with it, the culture also changes and shifts, because how your organization interacts with external environment, how it interacts with internal employees, everything changes. So I think that's what, a certain realization around various factors that impact culture kind of made me feel more interested in culture.
I can imagine because the organizations you've spoken about, they're absolutely leaders in their own space, but they're coming at it from very, very different perspectives.
True,
You know,
very true.
just to share a little bit about what interested me about culture so deeply, uh, was the fact that it's finally the last frontier that cannot be imitated. Because while almost everything else, you can learn from other organizations, or you can even buy technology, strategy, operations, etc. Culture is the one component which is really, really difficult to imitate. So I'm
Imitate.
hearing a little bit of feedback, so I'm just going to take off my headphones and see if that by any chance helps.
Okay. So we'll see. So, Smriti, I want to ask you this question now. You know, the lockdown got announced in India and many parts of the world fairly soon as last year. In India, of course, it was September. And pretty much overnight, without much preparation, organizations had to go virtual. So I'd like to get you about, your experiences in the organization virtual almost overnight. What were some of the challenges right at that time?
So, Shalini, talking about challenges, I think the starting point was, in a way, it was out of syllabus, right? Over years, we were prepared to work in a physical environment, sitting next to each other, get into meetings when needed, walk into somebody's room when needed. Um, we were never prepared to handle something of this scale and of this nature. When I say scale, it was not just one organization or one economy that was hit by it, it was across the globe, everybody was impacted. So it wasn't that somebody's experienced it in the past. Instead of reinventing the wheel, you just copy paste the solution and move forward, right? So I think that was the scale of the change. So it was totally out of syllabus. We were not prepared for it. I think that's the starting point. And when I say that, Shalini, it is also true that whether HR practitioners or academicians, everybody was talking about as future tense, future of work, right? And suddenly that future of work became present of work for us, right? Because everybody was thinking 2030, how will the world look like? Everybody was kind of figuring out how would 2040 be with respect to work, right? Nobody was saying that next year you're going to feel this challenge. So the future suddenly became present. So that definitely was a challenge. And I would also say, Shali, over years, again, as corporates, as we have worked, there are frameworks within which we work. There are policies. You prepare for change. There's a change management model all of us study. As per that, we prepare for the future to say this is how change will come into the organization. These are some policies, some blue books, some material to go through this change. There was nothing of that sort available for any of us, right? So I think if you look at the problem from that lens or COVID from that lens, it was a huge change that we all were hit by overnight, like you said. I think somewhere mid-March is when the lockdown was announced. And the assumption again around that time was that, oh, it's just about 20 days that Prime Minister is announcing it, we'll be back to work. Every organization, I think, was operating assuming next 20 days, next 20 days. We didn't know that it's going to last this long as well. So I think if that's the lens I'm looking at the challenges from. And therefore, if I think we all know about NASA's work around future of work, right? It broadly says that future of work is there are three parameters. You talk about work, worker, and workplace. And those are three lenses that I also use, Shalini, as I talk about the challenges with you. In that context, what is work? Work is your tasks and responsibilities, right? And when you talk about tasks and responsibilities, of course, the nature of work per se didn't change. We were still responsible, let's say, across organizations to get revenue. But by nature of work, I'm just picking up, let's say, my frontline sales guy who was supposed to go to the distributor, go spend quality time with him, build relationships, and that's how business moved. Suddenly, with COVID coming, there were restrictions on mobility, my sales guy could not walk up to the distributor, spend that quality time, and he was, indoors. And therefore, of course, the work changed by that definition, right? If you talk about worker is a sum total of, let's say, skills and expertise. And a basic example within that skills and expertise we talk about, we've again always thought about knowledge of others, knowing others, empathy. We've stressed so much around empathy, etc., over the last few years. If this is one skill or one competence that had to come to place, suddenly with COVID, what changed? It was knowing oneself. Suddenly we were forced to kind of get to know ourselves better. And the third pillar of future work, which was workplace, the platforms where the worker and the work interact, that changed totally overnight, like you said, right? We used to go to office, we used to work there. Now there was no physical office to which we were going, working, etc. We were all working from home. So the workplace as well changed. So all three definitions of future of work, or three pillars of future of work, as NASA had explained, all three pillars changed in one go. It wasn't one by one. We weren't prepared for the change, etc. There was no blue book telling us how to deal with it. So to your point, what were the challenges? I think all these together meant challenges for organizations that were working with an assumption that 2030 or 2020 is where the future of work is going to hit us, and at the pace at which we choose, right? So here there was no choice given to us. So I think these are some challenges that I've just kind of articulated, and I'm
You know,
hoping you kind of resonate with these.
I love your expression of out of syllabus,
Oh,
because I think that is exactly what it felt like. That it was something that got all of us unaware, and as you said, change needed to happen, you know, instantly across the world, changing the work dynamics fundamentally. Now, I know that a large part of RB's, workforce, as you mentioned, is out there in the field.
yeah.
So, what was that like when they couldn't be out there in the field?
I think across the globe, I will not just say RB, I think across the globe, if you look at it, Chalni, there's a lot of empathy that developed for people, for human beings, for the kind of work people do, etc. So I think in light of that, if you see, all organizations were trying to be more caring. Caring is one word that got added to organizational dictionary. Every time it used to be result orientation. But a lot of competencies and a lot of leadership behaviors, I'm sure, underwent change during these times, because care would have emerged as something that is an expectation as we go forward. So, to your point on frontline workers, I think they were the real fighters, if you honestly ask me, right? Whether it's my factory or my sales, factory had to continue during these times. Sales, you could still ask them and train them to move away from physical relationships to more virtual relationships. You could still, but factory work has to be done out of factory, right? So, in that context, I think you're right that they had to be managed differently. I think, more so, if I were to talk about sales workforce, Shalini, you're used to doing your work and getting numbers. Suddenly, somebody says that you are not going to the field, but still you're expecting to get your numbers. I think it takes away a lot of your psychological safety cover that we, so much talk about. That, oh, that means I'll not be able to deliver my numbers. That means the organization might start feeling that I'm not more useful in the future, or not that productive. I think as an organization, we definitely ensured that we provide that sense of care, that sense of belongingness with the organization, and say that it is something which is outside our control. We cannot, even if we try, we cannot control COVID, right? So I think that the biggest thing was psychological safety cover, which had to be reflected in the form of care, in the form of connectedness. I think so much of engagement we may not have done over years that we may have done in 1 year, especially with our frontline sales and factory folks, because we realized that they were the real, fighters, warriors. Because I also come from an industry, Shalini, which was very critical in these times. We were actually working towards a purpose of providing relevant products in time like these, right? So people, the kind of passion they also showed to ensure that, all our products are accessible by the end customer who really needs it at this point in time. That's our purpose, right? So they also showed a lot of maturity and showed to a certain extent selflessness, to deliver to the customer. So if employees come so much forward to meet the purpose and do something which is just outside the job description, I think it is the responsibility that organizations must show towards their employees as well, to ensure that they feel cared for, they feel that they will be taken care of in the long run, etc.
So wonderfully said, Smriti, and I'm hoping the voice problem is a little better.
No, I'm not facing it, Charlie, the voice problem.
So let me ask you, based on what you said about the extra levels of stress, because as you said, the expectations of outcomes obviously were there, but familiar ways of working vanished. Uh, could you share more about what an organization can do in such circumstances to help people feel cared for when, at the end of the day, salespeople are judged by outcomes?
So, what can organizations do for care? Right. That's the question, Shalini. So, I think lot of we also try to study it during these times, Shalini. Um, I think you broadly, Shalini, if you look at wellness, right, and care and wellness kind of hand in hand, you look at it from five different perspectives, right? It could be mental well-being, it could be emotional, it could be social, it could be physical, spiritual, all these five in total. You talk about wellness and care for your employees in various ways, Shalini. I think in this last 1 year, organizations, HR teams, leadership, they've tried to touch all these five in some way or the other, right? So if I just, give you a few examples to kind of help you understand, let's say what we tried to do. Let's say you talk about mental well-being, right? Now there are boundaries to work when we used to go to office. So at 7:30, whenever I want to go home, I would shut my laptop and take my car and come back home. With COVID, of course, a lot of it, I'm sure by now has been talk and it could sound obvious, but what happened to our employees was there was no shutting down of the laptop. People were still continuing, laptop is, let's say, on my dining table. I may be having lunch and then is some mails popped in, the lunch breaks were going away, etc. I think a lot of organizations tried ensuring that they reduce the time limit on Outlook calendar, for example. If my meetings are blocked for 30 minutes, the auto mode in the future from that time onwards became 25 minutes. So 5 minutes of gap I started getting automatically because meeting timelines were reduced. For example, a lot of countries I'm aware of moved towards 1 to 2 in the afternoons. The afternoon is primary lunchtime. No meetings can be scheduled because across the calendars were blocked from 1 to 2 for lunchtime, right? So you were trying to give people that space that they had when they were going to physical office, right? This is about, let's say, mental well-being. Shali, is something very small, but I don't think many of us notice is emotional well-being. When I leave my home behind, it's a choice I make when I go to office, right? So when I'm leaving my home behind, I'm leaving behind the homely chores. I'm leaving behind my in-laws. I'm leaving behind my kid. And therefore, my mental space is totally moving towards work. However, when I was working out of home, that emotional cutoff was becoming less and less possible, right? So a lot of people felt that stress. So many of my colleagues I would talk to, they would say, the work distribution between me and my wife is like this and this. She does this and I do the kitchen and, mopping and the work were divided. So the emotional disconnect became very difficult for a lot of people. Similarly, if you talk about spiritual, what is spiritual? Spiritual is about accepting who I am, right? That's the spiritual well-being. If you look at it, I think all of us in this 1 year have questioned, who am I? Am I at peace with myself? Because husband and wives are working out of the same home in this 1 year, a lot of confrontational issues also came up, right? So women, there were so many articles written around this last 1 year about how women have so much contributed and are a lot more stressed than men because of the work pressure, especially in the West, that may have added. There were no maids, etc., to support. So the emotional, the spiritual, the physical, all kinds of well-being got challenged. Organizations in their own ways have tried supporting. To your question on the support, of course, now I come back because these are the 5 wellness that you want to support your employees with. What could one do? Shalini, lot of organizations went into one-to-one counseling. Thankfully, at RB, we already had it from the past, but people were, very minimally using it. Over quarters, we saw the usage going up, not only of the reading of the articles, but reaching out to one-to-one consultants to just discuss your problems, right? There were cases that I have read that have gone up even with respect to discussing personal life space. Generally, on one-to-one coaching, people might discuss work, right? People have started discussing personal life because the coach doesn't know you. It's a virtual environment, so you've started discussing that in that space. If you think of it, something as small as what people would have struggled in the first month was, how do you sign documents? Because digital signatures was not the thing at the beginning, right? Everything would come to my room. I just have to continue to sign. All these solutions, these may be very small, but added to the stress of the employee. Because what otherwise took 10 minutes started taking 30 minutes just to figure out how to do it in the first 2 or 3 months. So I think that's broadly what organizations are trying to provide solution to over the last 6 months and maybe the next 6 months as we continue.
About what you said, Smriti, is the way you've explained this challenge of cutting off emotionally from, say, your phone to focus on work. And that's something which many people have actually loved to do. But when you're working in a small space, there's been this home and work sort of intersperse and are disentangled the two. That's been a huge source of stress behind many individuals. I think there's still a little bit of focus. So
There is, Shalini. I
I'm gonna
can't hear you totally.
I'm going to ask you the next question, and then I'm going to actually log myself out and come back in, just in
Okay.
case it will make a difference. So we'll see.
Okay. Okay. Okay.
My next question is, Smriti, wellness has come into the mainstream in a way that is new for us. How do you see this playing out in the next few years? And I'm going to meanwhile remove myself and come back in, and we'll see.
Shalini, just before you leave, the question is, how do we see wellness impacting us in the next few
Wellness,
years?
yes, the focus on
Play
wellness
out.
over the next few years. So I'll see you in just a few moments.
Okay.
You can go ahead and answer. I'm just removing myself for the sound.
Am I clear for you?
Yeah.
Perfect. All right. So, till Shalini, I think, joins back, the question on how wellness plays out in the coming few years, I think a lot of organizations and a lot of professionals clearly have kind of understood the importance of a concept like wellness. I think I would not deny that for me, if it was priority number 2, 3, 4, wherever in the past, it is, of course, gone up in hierarchy. Now, Shalini is back.
Yeah. Is it
So,
better?
all right.
Yeah, maybe.
Perfect. All right. So, Shali, I was just saying that over the last 1 year, I think given the learnings we've had, organizations and individuals alike have understood the importance of a concept like wellness. I would not lie. Reality is, wellness was definitely not top three priorities prior to COVID, right? But I think across organizations, professionals, everybody, I think it's come up the curve as a priority, and I'll be surprised if anybody is not talking about wellness amongst top three priorities as we go forward, right? So definitely it's a priority. And I don't think the solution to it is very easy because it has to be a lot more customizable. My the way I look at wellness and the way Shalini looks at wellness could be very different, or the what I am going through today could be a lot more around physical wellness, and what you're going through could be a lot more about emotional wellness, and therefore solutions would vary. So to your point, I think there is some time before we figure out what is that approach, 80/20. What is that 80% that will meet everybody's requirement, and what is that 20% that needs more customization? But I think lot of data crunching for sure across organizations has started around wellness. Charlie, you and I sometime back spoke about burnout, right? I don't think a lot of us realize where this burnout comes from, but burnout is broadly a combination, right? Let's say work week span. In a 5-day week or a 40-hour week, what does my week look like? Am I working for more than 40 hours? And what is that number coming to, right? And of those 40 hours that I'm expecting to work or wanting to work, what percentage is around collaboration, which means that I am in a meeting with at least one more person or attending seminars or something to do with others. Collaboration is something beyond me, right? So if my span is longer, work week span is longer, and my collaboration is also higher, that means I have very less of me time. And that me time could be my response to emails, could be when I'm supposed to do the thinking job, put certain presentations together, etc. If both of these are higher, burnout is bound to happen, right? And generally, given organizational priorities, 20% of people feeling that kind of a stress at any point in time, I think may be a fair thumb rule to hold, given priorities and where we are always pulled into. But if 20%, if there's a percentage population, more than 20% always feeling the stress, that clearly means that the ways of working, etc., are really stressed, or the priorities that organization has taken for the number of people are more than required. So I think the most important bit that organizations will look into, which would start challenging the productivity norms, efficiency, effectiveness norms, etc., in my mind, would be burnout. It has been spoken about through various surveys over years. All engagement surveys, people wanted, work-life balance over years. But I think it was always a second priority, like I said. But I think COVID has brought it in the forefront, and burnout as a question has to be answered in times to come. I think the other thing we have observed around this time is multitasking. I'm talking to Shalini, I'm in a meeting with Shalini, but at the same time, I'm answering emails, right? Now, as long as it is, let's say, 5 or 10% of my ways of working, it's fine, broadly as a thumb rule, right? But if I'm a chronic multitasker, it becomes a challenge because my effectiveness, I neither in the meeting nor there, is going to be high assumption. At the same time, that the output that is needed could be the quality of output could be impacted. And third, if I'm a chronic multitasker, clearly there is going to be a burnout and stress that I will be feeling as an individual. Otherwise, there's no reason why should I be at 2 or 3 places at the same time. And I think one more thing I would talk about, Charlie, the wellness, this entire concept of wellness has brought about is manager guidance. A lot of various generations may put various demands at corporate, but when you look at manager guidance, I think you realize, again, a lot of numbers can be produced in this context as well, that the time that manager spends with an employee, helping him or her understand either the work problem or help him break down the work problem into tasks, etc., reduces the burnout or the stress that an employee feels. So, generally, I think we talk a lot about coaching or mentoring or ensuring we spend time with employees. I don't think it is across organizations across the globe. It is, I think, a lot of our leaders are known for the output they give, but not necessarily for the team connect or employee connect, right? Those are not, again, top three bits. But across the globe, you will see I'm hoping we'll see the trend changing from purely output based relationship, task based relationships that we have been used to actually relationships to coach and mentor. I think that shift should also come about, given that it is assumed that when manager spends more time, or there's studies that prove that when manager spends more time with his or her teams, of course, the stress levels come down. So I think these are certain shifts, Shalini, that I foresee based on my experiences at office. So from burnout to chronic multitasking to manager guidance, these are some shifts that I assume should follow through in times to come.
No, very well said, Smriti. In fact, one of the things we've seen across organizations is um, employees have wanted to know that their manager cares for them in a more personal way. Because work, particularly in the early days when it became virtual, you know, it became entirely transactional. So we sort of lost that, human to human connect. So I still hear the echo. So we're just going to have to sort of live with that. Let me ask you, Smriti, the one question I think that's on the minds of many, many of us. With so many months of remote working, is it impacting culture? Is it impacting culture?
I think, Shani, if you think, I always go back to the basics to say over years, what have I learned about culture? I've learned that culture is, ideas, certain customary things that organizations do, certain social behavior that comes out, or certain things you do when nobody's watching, right? That's how we've been taught about culture. And we've been told that, told or we've practiced, I'm a practitioner, like you said, and we've practiced to say that culture is built through connections, through storytelling, that in my organization, all leaders tend to care. Now, these are stories you tell and they pass on from one person to another. There are artifacts and there are things that you see. You actually see your leader doing a particular way, and that you believe is the norm here, right? If culture is about ideas and spreading of ideas, not just ideas, spreading of those ideas in an organization, I think, I'll not lie. Reality is COVID put us in a backspace, in a, where we were not as connected as we were physically. We were learning how to connect digitally, right? We were the social gatherings or celebrations that always meant two-way communication. That meant coming together in the cafeteria, having samosas together or having some pizza together, and spending time with your leaders, etc. All those opportunities became a lot more one-sided. Even if they were two-sided, questions were asked on the side in the taskbar, right? There was no honest confrontation, etc., that could now happen. So, of course, to your point, could culture building move at the same pace at which it could move prior to COVID? I would say no. It, of course, slowed down. Work may have continued, but relationships and embarking on new relationships, I think of new hires. They only know the organization basis business impacting meetings, where if your numbers are not met, you're challenged, questioned without even knowing you too well. On the other hand, if numbers are met, there's a lot of clap that may be coming your way. But I think newcomers who had to learn the culture or understand the culture to kind of become part of the new organization would have felt challenged. Existing set of employees, etc., they would have challenged some of the foundation of that culture because they couldn't now see it like they could earlier. So yes, the pace at which the culture acceptance used to happen in the physical world slowed down for sure.
I think so too, to be honest. I think it's very challenging.
It
There are
is.
organizations which were born virtual and have figured ways to work because that's the only way they have operated and done so quite successfully. But those are fewer. I think for the most part, this has been a challenge. And since I'm conscious of the echo, I'm just going to ask one last question, Smriti, and I'm going to leave it to you to explain your thoughts around how hybrid is going to work in the future when now we start bringing back people into the office and how that's going to impact the building of culture.
So Shalini, you and I have seen the last 1 year that we were, prior to last 1 year, we were purely physical. In the last 1 year, a lot of us were purely digital. So hybrid, of course, what you're talking about is a combination, right? I think before I even start thinking how what will happen and how will it happen, just for us to be on the same contextual page, Shalini, I'm assuming for any change to come about, whether hybrid, virtual, physical, digital, one is the generational context, right? Which means that I may be fine as a which is the gender context. So there's generational, gender, and I'm looking at, let's say, cultural context here, three contexts. From a generational context, millennials, I assume, will have a lot more higher need to be in office because they are looking forward. That's the surveys, etc. That's the surveys talking, right? Will have a lot more higher need to be in office because they want to be coached. They want to experience. You know, we talk about millennials wanting to experience. They want to travel a lot because they want to experience. Experience is the it word. So, from that context, the need to be in office, surrounded by colleagues, having town halls, celebrations, or meetings in physical space could become important from a for millennials from a generational context. However, the same may not be true for Gen X, Gen Y, etc. Right? That's the generational context. If I talk about cultural context, right? Um, for example, if you look at India as a culture, in a cultural context, we all, most, lot of us still live in joint families. So, joint family, but let's say, assume a smaller house, still working morning 9 to evening 6 could become a lot more tougher. So, that set of employees who are feeling the pinch of physical space working out of home or too many people in the same house, etc., getting your privacy to work could become a challenge. So, therefore, this set of employees in Indian cultural context could be wanting to go back to office a lot more earlier than others. And the third, like I said, is gender context, which is people like me. If given a choice, my context could be very different because my daughter is 10 now. I have only seen her in evenings or weekends for all my years of working, except for, of course, maternity leave. If given a choice that I can have her around and still get accomplished all my work, etc., I may be somebody who says that I would prefer working from home a lot more, right? So, all I'm trying to say is that to each his own. You know, we are all adults in certain contexts, and therefore, if we are all committed towards our work, then gender context could be very different from generational, could be very different to cultural context, and therefore the needs that we put forward in the future from any one singular employee perspective could be very different. So that's the starting point on hybrid, and therefore, you know, all organizations as we move forward will feel challenged because every employee will put forward a very different kind of need for the organization, right? Um, and if I look forward, what kind of hybrid working are we talking about? I'm thinking it may not just be about place, whether I'm in office or I'm at home. This hybrid may also be of time, for example, right? I prefer to work from 10 to 4. Shani prefers to work from 4 to 8, just saying, right? So, of course, the timing combinations will have to come into play. Days, I know that my husband works for Saturdays. My husband works Monday to Friday. Can I ensure I work Saturday, Sunday, but get my Monday, Tuesday free so that those are days I can spend at home, right? So that kind of like the reality, Shalini, is that people have loved the choice also to a certain extent that came with COVID.
Yeah.
The fact that they could have their families around, they started looking that as a silver lining, and they loved it. They enjoyed it because that time was something they never could get before COVID, right? So I think with that has come all these options. I want flexibility in a day, or on time, or on place, or on my role. I want to do part time work. And I know in my younger days, there was so much talk about job sharing, right? And then it lost its focus and fizz around it went, if the buzz around it went away. Could those concepts be coming back? And here I'm not talking about gig workers, because gig is that you pick up a project and you deliver to it. I'm saying it's going to be my full-time role, but I will do half a day, Shalini will do the other half of the day, and both of us are so committed to it that we will ensure there's alignment to the end objective, right? So I think COVID has reminded us of all these optionalities, and therefore hybrid again. I've added beyond the context of generation or gender. This is another context, another variable. Then what kind of hybrid or choice are we talking about? Now, having known that these two are purely variables, I could be a different generation, different gender, or I may want of time or place. What are the considerations that organizations are looking at, or I would, as a HR professional, want to draw out to say I have to give these choices to my people? I think the starting point for anything is mutual trust, which is that I will believe that my employee will deliver what is needed to be delivered, because I think he or she is an adult and not a kid. And similarly, the employee has trust that organization means the best for me, right?
Yeah.
So I think it has to start with that underlying assumption that there's mutual trust between the employee and the organization. And then, of course, is accountability. With every empowerment or trust that comes into play, there is this need to be held accountable still. So instead of, over years, it has primarily been about being present, right? Now, can we move to more output driven as a culture? I'm sure we are moving, because COVID didn't offer us choice. Nobody could check whether my employee is working 9 to 6 or not. The assumption is he or she is, as long as output is getting delivered. So accountability, I would say, becomes very important, that we move towards an output driven culture, as you know. And the third, I would say, Shalini, is empowerment. And you can empower your employees through the right set of policies, tools, and technology. So if we were to move towards more hybrid culture, I think these three things, all organizations and individuals, that there has to be mutual trust, accountability will continue to be there, and organization has to ensure that it empowers its employees through whether policies or tools and technology, to ensure that hybrid really becomes a success. So broadly, I think this is how I would be planning it. I'm assuming this is how all organizations are planning it.
No, it makes so much sense, Priti, because we are freed from the shackles of 9 to 5 thinking, and this is the first time. And the reason why we ever thought 9 to 5 is, the fact that the Industrial Revolution 100 years ago started in factories, and so you needed everybody to be working, together in a shift, and
True.
that sort of thinking has dominated the way organizations have functioned, even when it wasn't necessarily the same. So it sort of frees us to think completely differently. And as you said, some of the fundamentals are reimagining work, synchronous, asynchronous working, where is collaboration really needed, where can simple coordination work, individual choices and personas. I mean, it just opens up the entire set of possibilities that isn't there. You know.
True.
So, thank you so much, Smriti. I'm really apologetic that there's just a little bit of voice challenge. I know.
Not at all, Shalini. I can also hear some, I don't know if our audience or you, I could hear you in parts. So I'm making up assumption around the rest of it that I've got the question right. So I think definitely there's some challenge around the mic.
Right. But anyway, it was such a pleasure speaking with you, Smriti, because I really love the way you think about many of these issues. I think it's very insightful, and I love the way you're able to take some of the experiences of your organization and extrapolate what they mean more broadly. And I know that that was really, really helpful. So thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you, Shalini. Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye.